So he has a little bit of an introduction to the introduction here, which I'm going to skip for now. He wants to know about the Seder HaMasechtos in Taros, because there are actually 6 Masechtos in Taros before Nida. Nida is number 7. And the Rambam has a whole theory as to why Nida was postponed till the end of Taros. But that's, as I say, for another time. We want to jump right into the laws of Nida. And we're going to have to compare 2 parshios in the Torah. One parsha is in Vayikra Tezvav, and the other is in Vayikra Chavhei. In Perek Tezvav in Vayikra, Ve'isha Kisiyeh Zava Dam Yeh Zova B'Psara Shivas Yomim Tiyeh B'Nidasa, etc. So this parsha is what we call a Nida. Then we fast forward to parsha Chavhei, and then we get into what's called a Zava. So in order to understand Masechta Nida, our first introduction is to differentiate between Nida and Zava. In the case of Nida, which we just read, the Torah says, Shivas Yomim Tiyeh B'Nidasa. For 7 days, she's in Nida, and that generates what's called Tumas Nida, and Chok V'lo Yaver. There's no exception to the rule. If she's in Nida, whatever it means that she became a Nida, whatever that means, we have to study, then the status of a Nida is 7 days of Tumah. And that stands in contrast to a Zava. Because the Torah says that Isha ki Yosef Zav Dama, then it's got to be Yomim Rabim. What that means by Yomim Rabim is that it's not like a Nida who saw what we call one single Re'iyah, and she automatically becomes a Nida. Here we're talking about a Zava. Zava is someone who has a ziva of Yomim Rabin, which we'll see exactly how much Yomim Rabin is. But let's just throw out the number 3. Let's say for 3 consecutive days, she sees ziva. Again, we have to understand the difference between ziva and nida. There's dam nida, and there's another kind of dam nida, which is called ziva. In the case of ziva, she has to see during a period of Yomim Rav. Now, what makes this dam into dam ziva, which would, if she sees Yomim Rav, generate a status of a zava? Maybe it's dam nida, and the Torah says below ace nidas, ace meaning time. So we see that the time of the month is going to determine whether that dam is dam nida or dam zava. Again, we don't know what that means, ace, below ace nidasa, but it's a period of time where she does not, shall we say, anticipate to become a nida, for whatever reason, and that period of time now becomes days of ziva. And if she sees Yom and Rabim during the days of ziva, then she becomes a zava. The Torah goes on to say that ki tazuv al nidasa kol yemei zov tu masa kimei nidasa tia tmeahi. And the Torah gives us an entire sentence here, which we have to interpret word by word. It seems totally ambiguous and totally superfluous. But the punchline of this, in the case of Parshas Ziva in Vayikra Chavhei, are the following words: V'im Torah mizova, and if she wants to be mitayr herself from Zova, v'safra la shivas yomim, she's got to count another 7 days. And v'acher, and then after those 7 days, titayim. So in the case of Nida, it's a 7-day deal. There are no exceptions. She saw one dam during the Yemei Nidas, during that Nida period, which is part of the month that's she anticipates becoming a Nida. And that one Re'iyas Dam makes her into a Nida who's Tmeya for 7 days. That's it. After the 7 days, she's no longer Nida. Now we flip it to the case of Zava. In the case of Zava, she's seeing these Re'iyos Shalobi Eis Nidasa, so we know it's a different period of time. And not only that, she's seeing Yomim Rabin. It's not like one Re'iyah and one, what we call Tipas Dam Kechadel, a small amount of Dam that she sees once makes her into Zava. She's got to see below Eis Nidasa, Yomim Rabin. Now she sees Yomim Rabin. Okay, she's Tmeya. Well, how long is she Tmeya? The Torah doesn't say. The Torah only tells us how long she's Tmeya in an inference, because the Torah is going to tell us when she becomes Tahora. And that's how we're going to derive how long she's Tmeya. Again, what the dinim of Hatuma are, that's another subject. I mean, there are many different topics here. And the Torah says that in order for her to extricate herself from Tumas Ziva, once she became a Zava and she saw Yom and Rabin below Eis Nidasa, she needs V'sofrala Shivas Yom. She has to count 7 days. Those days are called Nikiyim. Nikiyim means where she guarantees that for 7 days she didn't see any dam. That's called Naki. And Yom Naki is 1, another Yom Naki is 2, and it has to count 7 days until you have 7 days of Nikiyim. Now, our situation today is radically different. Our situation today is such that every woman is considered a Zava, meaning we always assume that she's a Zava. That's why Zayin Nikiyim, counting Zayin Nikiyim, is absolutely uniform today and under every situation of a Nida. So this distinction between Nida and Zava, where a Nida is 7 days and then after, a Nida could see for 7 days, from day 1, nonstop, till day 7. And on day 8, after she goes to mikveh, etc., she becomes tahora. She doesn't need nikiyim. In the case of a Zava, she can see 3 days consecutively. She becomes a Zava during below Eis Nidasa, whatever that period of time is. And then when she counts Zayin Nikiyim, then she becomes tahora at the end of this Zayin Nikiyim after she goes to mikveh. And we'll see about karbanos and so forth and so on. But today, every woman is assumed to be a Zava. We don't know the difference between Eis Nidasa and below Eis Nidasa. So we always assume with Chumrah that she's a Zava, and therefore every so-called Nida requires Zayin Nikiyim. Again, it's a misnomer. We actually are misusing the words. When we say that a woman is a Nida, we really don't mean that. We use the word Nida. That's the name of this Masechta. But we really don't mean a Nida. What we mean is what? A Zava. And again, you ask me why. Why do we assume she's a Zava? Great question. We'll have to answer that question. But right now, we're going back to the Doraisa halacha, because that's going to give us the framework for understanding Masechta Nida. And the framework is this fundamental distinction between 2 parashas. One in chapter 15 of Vayikra, the other in chapter 25 of Vayikra. The first is the chapter of Nida, and the second is the chapter of Zov. Now he writes the following. Pirshu Chachamim. And so until now we have Torah Sheb'Tzav. Now we're up to Torah Sheb'al Peh. Sheparsha Rishona in Yona Tumas Nida, whereas Parsha Shnia is in Yona Tumas Ziva. What's Tumas Nida? In Rasa Ha'isha Dam, Afilu Ria Achas. One time she saw Dam, but she saw it during what we call Yemei Nidosa. We're going to divide up her month into 2 sections. There's going to be one section called Yemei Nidosa, which are the days in which she has a potential of becoming a Nida, even if she only sees 1 Riyah of Dam. And then we're going to have Yemei Ziva, which is below Eis Nidasa, and for that we need Yom and Rab. So she sees 1 Riyah during Yemei Nidasa, Harei Nases Bazen Nida. Now what is the din of a Nida? Li olam hitmea benitasa shivas yomim. All you have to remember is one number, the number 7. That's all you have to know about Nida. Not today, but again, on a Doraisa level, according to Torah law, that's all you have to know is 7 days she's a Nida. How many re'iyas did she have in those 7 days? She could have seen straight through 7 days, or she could have seen one re'iyah that triggers off 7 days of Nida. And therefore, li'olam hitnea b'nidasa shivas yomim v'ein badin sfiras yemei nikiyim. There's no such thing as require. If you would invoke the principle of sfiras yemei nikiyim with regard to nida, that's a misnomer. You're totally off base. There is no such thing as counting yemei nikiyim for a nida. Lefichach. Afilu imadayin zov dama b'shivas yimei anidus mikamakom mafsekes b'tara b'shvi v'tovelos l'shmini v'arehi tahora. She sees 7 days straight. As soon as she stops seeing, she makes what's called a hefsek. Hefsek meaning she checks herself and she's no longer seeing down. At that point, her nidus period is terminated. On the 8th day, she goes to mikvah. Again, is it during the day? Is it at night? We'll get to that later soon. Darshu Chacham. Yachal haroet shivas gimel yomim b'tchilas nida ritzufin tehei zava. What happens if during the Yemei Nidus she sees 3 consecutive days? Shall I entertain that she's a zava? Umani mekayim icha kitia zava dam yeh zava b'royom echad. Below Eisni Dasa, there's a period of time after her nidus, which is below Eisni Dasa. She's finished with being a nida, and yet she saw a re'iyah. That's, we'll call it a bizarre kind of re'iyah. And that re'iyah is below Eisni Dasa. Then, if she sees Yom and Rabim, she becomes a Zov. That's only below Eisni Dasa. And that's going to be a Zava, and then she needs Zayin Nikiyah, what we call Sfiras Yomim. But in the case of Nida, as we said before, we don't have such a concept of Sfiras Yomim Nikiyah. She's a Nida for 7 days, she stops, and now she goes to mikvah on the 8th day. That's Parsha, Roman numeral number 1, Vayikra Tesva. Now we fast forward 10 chapters to Vayikra Perek Chafeh. Parsha Shniya in Yoma Tuma Ziva. Hainu, Isha Shara below Eisni Dasa, he Tmeya B'Tumas Ziva. In Hazava, Eno Kitin Hanida, Shazava Tzricha Lispar 7 Yomim Nikiyim. Yomim She'ena Roa B'Hem Da. After Zayin Nikiyim, but only after Zayin Nikiyim can she extricate herself from Tumas Zava, and she's Mitaheres Atzma B'Mikvah. And that's in contrast to a need. Okay, now let's see how a woman becomes a Zava. So again, we're not yet ready for the main question. When is below Eisni Dasa? But let's leave that question on the back burners. Has she become a Zava during that period of time of below Eisni Dasa? And there's something called, again, this is the most fundamental distinction in Masechet Nida, is something called a Zava Ketana and a Zava Gedol. Now, a Zava Ketana had only one re'iyah on one day, or possibly 2 re'iyos on 2 consecutive days, but she did not have a re'iyah on the 3rd day. So it's either 1 or 2. She becomes a Zava Gedol, a Zava Ketan. Oh boy, that was a bad mistake. A Zava Ketan. She only becomes Zava Gedola if she sees 3 consecutive days. So now we're talking about a Zava Ketan, she saw 1 day, let's say. There's another synonymous term to describe a Zava Ketan. and that's called Shomeres Yom Kineged Yom. And we'll explain. Once she sees one Re'iyah below Eisli Dasa during the Yemei Haziva, then she's a Zava Ketana, and in order to purify herself, so to speak, in order to leave that status of a Zava Ketana, she needs one Yom Naki. She will count one day. That's called Shomeres Yom. Shomeres means she's careful to see that she doesn't see any dam. So on Sunday, she had a Re'iyah during below Eisli Dasa during Yemei Ziva. She checked herself on Monday. The entire day was Naki. She now leaves the status of a Zava Ketana. If she sees on Tuesday, she once again becomes a Zava Ketana, but it doesn't connect to the Ziva that she had on Sunday, because once she had a Yom Naki that Monday, when she didn't see any Dam, then whatever she saw on Sunday is irrelevant. It's gone with history. Again, she has to get out of the state of a Zava Ketana, but that Re'iyah of Sunday could never link up with the Re'iyah on Tuesday to make it consider that she had two Re'iyahs, such that if she sees on Wednesday, she becomes Zava Gdol. That's not so. The two Re'iyos of Tuesday and Wednesday, which are two consecutive days, will now lead up, or could lead up, might lead up, to a Re'iyah on Thursday, which would have three consecutive Re'iyahs and make her into a Zava Gdol. So now we want to study the laws of Zava Ketana and the laws of a Zava Gdol.
That's not what the Chumash.
Everything that we're learning is Pirshu Chacham. You know, we only got this from Torah. The only thing we got from Torah B'Chsav so far was a distinction between Nida and Zava.
So why do we need to make this times of the from the Torah? It says
that's all Pirshu Chacham. That right? Everything that we did. If you see the second paragraph, Pirshu Chachamim, so that means that everything we're learning now is what's called Torah Sheba'al Peh. Moshe Rabbeinu received two Torahs. You got the Torah Sheba'al at Har Sinai, you got the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And we're now studying the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So what is Tumas Ziva? Yesh lo shtei ofanim. There are two branches, two separate categories, subcategories of Zava. One is called Zava Ketana, and the other is Zava Gdol. Zava Ketana, Shimrasa b'Yemei Ziva. Again, everything is during Yemei Ziva, below Eisli Dasa. Yom Echad, O Shnayim, or possibly 2 days. Harei Shomeres Yom Echad b'Nikius. Right, the word Shmirah means to make sure it's a Yom Naki, without any dam. The Acharka, once she passes through that Yom Naki, Toveles Viniteres. She completely purifies herself from the state of Tumah of a Zava Ketana because she had one Yom Naki. Again, we've been speaking about 7 days of Nikiyah, Zion Nikiyah. That's because we're talking about a Zava Gdol. But in the case of a Zava Ketana, who's a Shomeres Yom Kineged Yom, she only has one sphera of one single day of Nikiyah. Once she passes that day, we called it Monday, she is now capable of going to the mikveh and being retire herself from Zava Ketana, whatever the dinim of Zava Ketana we'll see. What's a Zava Gedola? Who? Shemrasa b'Yemei Ziva. Again, everything is b'Yemei Ziva when we talk about a Zava. Shlosha Yomim Ritzufim. Ritzufim means continuous. 3 consecutive days. Then Sricha Lispar Shivas Yomim Nikiyah. She had 3 consecutive Riyas on 3 consecutive days. Again, if she had 2 Riyas on Monday or 2 Riyas on Sunday, she still remains a Zava Ketana, and she only needs 1 Yom Naki. It's a paradoxical situation. She saw 2 days of Dam consecutively, and all we require of her is 1 Yom Naki. Shomeres Yom Kineged Yom. But the moment that she sees 3 consecutive days during Yemei Ziva, and she becomes now a Zava Gedola. She could not extricate herself from the state of Tumah of Ziva without Zayin Nikiyah. Now, let's say she counts 6 days Nikiyim and then she sees Dam on the 7th day. That's called stira. Stira means it breaks down the entire counting. You have to start from scratch. 0. She doesn't get any credit for the 6 days of Nikiyim. And we've had shilas like this all the time. A woman comes to a Rav. She made a B'dik, an internal investigation. She sees on the 7th day of Zayin Nikiyim, she was successful for 6 days. And unfortunately, she saw Dam on the 7th day. And the Rav has to tell her, if he can identify this as Dam, that she has to start all over again, because that one Re'iyah is a Riyah Soteret. Again, it could be on the 2nd day, it could be on the 3rd day. But just to dramatize it, imagine if she sees a Dam on the 7th day. That's already a stira. She's got to start again. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Now you may need siva murim pirusha hem b'chachamim sheyimei nida hem shivas yomim shlach hariyah rishon. When we talk about 7 days of a nida, it means from the first re'iyah, just count 7 days. She's a nida no matter what. Doesn't matter whether she sees constantly, as we said, or she doesn't have any other re'iyah. You may ziva. Oh, now we get to the punchline, which this is the bumpy ride. When is Shalo B'Eis Nidasa, otherwise known as Yimei Ziva, such that now, if she sees a Re'iyah, she becomes a Zava Ketana. If she sees 2 Re'iyahs, she still remains a Zava Ketana, and all she needs is 1 Yom Naki. She sees 3 Re'iyahs consecutively, she becomes a Zava Gedol, and she needs Zayin Nikiyim. Hemachada Sar Yom, okay, now the secret number is 11. She finishes the 7 days of Nidus. She enters into a time period which is called 11 days of Yemei Ziva. Doesn't mean she's a Zava. It means that potentially she might become a Zava during that 11-day period. And those are called 11 days of Yemei Ziva. And again, when did the Yemei Ziva, these 11 days, begin? Immediately after the 7 days of Nida. Because again, with regard to a Nida, it's always a block of 7 days. Come high or heck water, it doesn't make, or heck down, it doesn't make any difference. Once she finishes the 7-day period, she enters into a period called Yemei Ziva. Now, this becomes complicated because what happens if she has a flow of nidus that goes beyond the 7 days? Does that mean that on day 8, she becomes a Zava Ketana? Or do we extend the days of nida into the 8th day because she never stopped flowing as a nida, and then day 9 becomes the beginning of the 11 days of Ziva? That's where the ride gets bumpy. But let's just take simple things first, because this is an experiment. And we're talking about a woman who sees Nida on a Sunday. She is a Nida until Shabbos. And on that Sunday, the following Sunday, she starts Yemei Ziva, which means, again, if she sees 1 Riyah, she's a Zava Ketana. She sees 2 days consecutively, she's a Zava Ketana. If she's a Shomeres Yom and she gets 1 day of Naki, forget about those 2 days. She goes to mikvah and she's fine. If she sees 3 days consecutively during Yemei Ziva, which is called in the Torah language Shalo B'Eis Nidasa, those 3 consecutive days of Re'iyah during the 11 days make her into a Zava Gedola. And that means she'll require Zayin Nikiyah. Again, we haven't discussed other issues about Tumas Mishkav, Tumas Moshav, about Karbanos, and so forth and so on. We haven't even gotten into that yet. Okay, now we move on to the left column here on the first page. First page is called Beis. Isha shezov dam mimekoro afilu pam achas bilvad Vafilu tipas dam achas bilvad, harei hi nida vitmea betumas nida shivas yom. It doesn't matter how much dam she saw. In the language of the Talmud, that's called afilu tipas dam kechardel. Chardel is a very small mustard seed. She saw a drop of blood. It makes her into a nida for 7 days. Yeah, we're talking about Yemei Nidus. But where did the dam come from? Obviously, if she gets a scratch on her arm, that's not dam nidus. It's got to be dam min hamokar, which loosely translated, although you have to know the biology of it, is the uteral blood. And we have to figure out, how did she know that that dam was dam from uterus? Because in a woman's vaginal area, there are many cracks and crevices in the membrane, in the skin. And if she sees dam from those walls, that's not dam nidus. The dam nidus means it came from the mocha. It came down into what's called the Beis HaChitzon. Again, we'll go into the biology at some other point, but the halacha is going to have to grapple with this question. When and how do we determine that this is dam min hamokar that makes her into a nida? Shenemar, the pasuk says, Shivas Yomim Tia B'Nidasa. That was the pasuk that we started with in the 15th chapter by Yikra. 7 days she's a nida. And the Torah doesn't tell me how much dam she saw, therefore we assume any tipas dam kechardel is sufficient, and it engenders her status of a nida for 7 days of tumah. After 7 days, she stops seeing, which is called mafsekes bitara, and that means she's completed her state of nida. This is Doraisa Halacha in Vayikra Tesvav. Tovelas viniteris. She goes to mikvah and she becomes tahor. Okay, now what is the status of a nida? Number one, she's an av hatuma, right? We have in tuma avos and toldos. Toldos could be a rishon l'tuma, could be a sheni l'tuma, could even be a shlishi. There might even be something called a revi l'tuma, possible. At least as far as Truma and Kodshim, but that's something not for us. So she becomes an avatum. What else? Fechein mitames mishkav, moshav, umerkav. Now these are cases where she doesn't have direct contact. She's not touching something, but rather something is carrying her. And if something is carrying her, that's called mishkav or merkav or moshav. It means if her weight is, the weight of her body is being held up by a moshav. Moshav would be, let's say, a couch. Mishkav would be a bed that she sleeps on. Again, we'll see the differences between mishkav and moshav. Then we have Merkav, where she's vertical, but she's riding something. So the animal on which she's riding is carrying her weight. And she can now convey Tumah through Merkav, Mishkav, and Moshav because she has the status of an Avatum. And by the way, the only Tumah that's higher than an Avatumah is Tumas Mes, which has what's called an Avi Avos HaTumah. Which means that it can create an Avatum. It's the only Tumah that can generate a status of an Avatum. But with the, leaving that exception on the side, an Avatuma can create Tumah, but not an Avatum. An Avatum can't create an Avatum. What else is she metame? Now here's the opposite. Here's where her weight is carrying some other object. So there's a keli on top of her body. She is carrying the keli. She didn't touch the keli. the keli contracts tuma because she's an avatuma. And an avatuma is metame when the avatuma carries a keli on top that's called al gava. And she becomes what's called a madaf lekelim. She's like a shelf holding on to the kli, holding up the kli. That's as far as tumas nida. But you know that bris is famous for tzvei dinim. When we get to nida, we have a doraisa tzvei dinim. We don't need Reb Chaim Brisker for this. This is in the Torah. There are two dinim to a nida, and we should never confuse them. They are fundamentally different. Till now, we've been dealing with tumas nida. Then there's something called isur nida. Nida is one of the bios asuras. I don't want to call her an erva because then I'm getting into a major controversy about whether a nida is an erva or not an erva. On the one hand, bias nida generates curry, so she should be an erva. But on the other hand, it's a temporary kind of status of an erva, so maybe she's not an erva at all. Okay, but she's definitely asura. So, for example, a man is married to a woman, she becomes a nida. She's asura labaila with an isa karas. Let's say, for example, an unmarried woman who is prohibited under, let's say, the Yisur Lav of Kedecha, or maybe Bittul Essay of Kedusha. I mean, that's a sugya, but he went ahead and he had bia with her, violated the Torah law. If she's a nida, she's a nida. He's chayv kares for it, even though she's not married. It's irrelevant. She saw a dam, she became a nida. And that gives her the status of an isur nida. The big question, by the way, is yichud, because you're not allowed to have yichud with an erva. How is a married man allowed to be alone in a locked room with his wife who's a nida? Not an easy question to answer, by the way. I mean, we know it's mutter, but why is it mutter? The Torah says, Ishal tumas nidasa lo sikrav, and then the Torah says, V'nichrasu anafashos, both he and she will be chayav kares, assuming it was made. Umetame says bol. Now there's another din of tumah. Once we mentioned a man who had relations with a nida and violated the isur kares, we go back to the laws of tumah, because metames as bola lios kemosa. The boel now becomes an avatuma. That's already a din of tumah. Has nothing to do with the isur of kares for having beer with the nida. So again, I just want to reiterate this. We have one more little small paragraph for today. There is a fundamental difference of two dimensions to nida. One is tumah v'tara, she becomes tmeya. She's an avatuma. We spoke about mishkav and moshav and merkav. We spoke about kelim al gava. And then there's an isur kares to have beer with the nida. Afshem in Torah eina nida surah ela b'tashmish. Shar krevo shal ishus. Okay, we'll have to see what that means. Teknu chachamim the asru harbe hanhodos shal kirav hadas beino leveina baila kedei laharchik es ha'adam min aver. So as you know, a husband and a wife during her period of nidus are not allowed to eat from the same plate, maybe not even from the same table. We'll have to see that. We find harchakas of that sort in the laws of basar b'cholov. You're eating meat and I'm eating milk. We can't eat from the same table. That's called halal hashulchan. And kidei laharchik adam and avera. You know, I might be tempted to take a piece from your plate, you from mine, especially for old buddies. And in the case of nida baila, they have a relationship called kirav hadas. They have an intimate relationship. There are special harchakas. I don't have to tell you this. A man is not allowed to pass something directly to his wife who's a nida. He's got to put it on the table. That's not true in general. Okay, you may have chumras, I'm not talking about chumras, but I'm standing on line at a cashier and she gives me change in my hand. That's okay. But if my wife is in need, she can't put the change into my hand. They have special archakos in the case of a husband and wife. And paradoxically, yichud is not on the list. So he's allowed to be alone with his wife when she's in need, but she's not allowed to make his bed, or at least not in front of him. She's not allowed to eat from his plate or he from her plate. She's not allowed to hand things to him or he to her directly. I mean, there are a whole bunch of archakos, and dafka because of the intimacy between a husband and a wife. And now she's in need, and there's a chashash of nisa karetz. Rahman al-Islam. But on the other hand, dafka l'kula, and that is yichud. He's allowed to be alone with her in the same room. And the Gemara calls that paspasalo because he realizes that she'll go to the mikveh after she finishes with her nidus, and he's able to contain himself and wait. But all these other archakos are special chumras with regard to a husband and a wife when she's a need. Okay, then, so that's what we have for today. If you want to express your opinions now or later, or write me an email, whatever you like. Otherwise, I'm going to give this a grade A. And we'll continue with this because this is fascinating. It's a big fish, Nima. It's one of the most complicated Masechtas in Shas, and one of the longest Masechtas in Shas. So it'd be good to have an introduction. I will not give myself an A+. In undergraduate school and graduate school, I always wondered if I could get an A+. In graduate school, I got one A+. In constitutional law. In Australia, they have a constitution. They do. In Israel, they don't have a constitution. So you can't take constitutional law. But in America, I took constitutional law, and I sensed what my professor, where he put the emphasis. I had an intuition. There's something called federalism, which has to do with states' rights and what rights do the states give to the federal government, so forth and so on. And I had a sense that he would ask a question on the final about federalism. I locked myself up in a library for weeks studying federalism. He gives me back my paper with an A+ with a note on it. I'm going to say it in my language. He didn't say it in this language. You were machadish chidushim to me that I never knew. I mean, this is a professor that's been quoted on the Supreme Court on numerous occasions. And I was machadish chidushim. Gave me an A+. The only time in graduate school or in undergraduate school I got an A+. Okay, so let's learn Yavamis now. Okay. Okay, so what do I have?